My name is Chan Chen. My pronouns are he, him, his, and my title would be Doctor. I've done a PhD in English with a creative writing focus. Well, I was born in South China, in Xiamen, and that's where my extended family still lives, most of them. But I grew up in Western Massachusetts, in Amherst. Came to the United States when I was about 4, so I guess I identify most with Massachusetts. I've lived in Western Mass and also in the Boston area. For me, home is a very complicated notion. It can mean many different things depending on what I'm focusing on in my writing. When I write about being from China, a lot of what I'm drawing from is my parents' stories and memories from before we came to the United States. So it's based on a lot of conversations, especially with my mother, who I think is kind of our family's storyteller. So I draw inspiration a lot from that, but also from just my everyday experiences of living in different parts of the country. So as I said, I've grown up in Massachusetts, but I've also lived in Texas, I've lived in upstate New York, so I've moved around. All of those different settings and parts of the country have influenced my work. Really anything can inspire my writing. I try to stay really open and receptive. For instance, one of the big inspirations is television, actually, which is kind of funny, because I think maybe people don't expect a poet to be that into television, movies, but that has always been an obsession of mine. I just love following characters around for multiple seasons and seeing their storylines deepen and getting to know them better. And I would say that's definitely been an influence on my writing. One of those TV shows that's been very important to me and remains so is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because the mix of tones, the use of humor, how it's sort of a mashup of different genres. I feel like that really speaks to the core of who I am as a creative person, and so that feeds into my writing often. I write a lot about family. After my first book came out, which has a lot to do with my relationship with my mom, especially, I really wanted to try to write something entirely different. I was kind of tired of returning to the subject, and I was also worried that people might think, oh, that's all that you write about. But I also think that oftentimes the subjects that matter most to us, we don't really choose them, they choose us. And it's this well that we keep returning to. And so when I did start writing new poems after that first book, I found myself again returning to that relationship, but in a different sense. A lot of the earlier poems were written from the perspective of childhood or adolescence, but now I'm thinking a lot more about my relationship with my mother and my family in general as an adult. So there's definitely a perspective shift there. And my parents have read some of my poetry. I don't know if they've read my entire book. They have it. But I think poetry isn't really their thing, so to speak. I think like a lot of Chinese families, Chinese parents, they wanted me to go into a more financially stable and lucrative field. And so it's taken them some time to come around to the fact that this is the path I've chosen. It's an artistic path. But they have been very supportive, especially in recent years. I think they understand aspects of it. Since I do write about them, I think they share in some of those memories and some of those stories. But I think for them, they would probably wonder, why is it that I want to write so much about the less pleasant moments and aspects of our relationship, and also of being Chinese immigrants and Chinese Americans in the United States and what that experience has been like. For them, I think, sharing those emotions is really important. And as I said, my mom is a great storyteller. And we've had conversations about a lot of these issues. But I think for them, it doesn't need to take the form of something that then is public and available to other people to pick up and read. So I think they have a different attitude about that. So yeah, I think for my parents, they don't quite understand, they don't fully understand why it is that I have this need to share these very personal and vulnerable stories with the public, with readers who are going to pick up the book and not know anything about me or anything about my family, but get this perspective, get this access into parts of our lives. And so that's something that I've thought a lot about, and I do try to be careful in what I choose to share. Some of it might be very personal and vulnerable, but at the same time, I'm making that decision and crafting it in a way where I can feel comfortable enough to share it. The gay and Asian American community is really important to me. And I mean, growing up, I really didn't have any role models who identified with both of those identifiers, both gay or queer and Asian American. And so I felt like a lot of the knowledge and history that I wanted to know about, I had to seek out and learn on my own through my own reading. And it wasn't until college that I could really talk with peers about both of these identities and how they interact with one another. Because for me, they're really inseparable. But earlier in my life, I couldn't talk about being gay with my family, and I couldn't really talk about being Asian American with my friends in high school, because many of them were white and didn't have the same experiences or the same outlooks, and didn't have to deal with the racism that I had experienced and my family experienced. So I felt very divided for a long time. And in my writing, one of my main goals has been to bridge these identities and these experiences so that they can sort of come together and sit in the same room, have a dialogue, rather than being kept apart all the time. And so it means so much to me when I get to meet readers, other writers as well, who share in these identities. I remember in particular doing this one reading in San Francisco, and it was such a moving event for me because not only were the other readers, most of them were also queer and Chinese American or Taiwanese American, but also the organizers were queer and Chinese American. And many of the people in the audience, because this was San Francisco, were also queer and Asian American. So it was just really amazing to be in a room like that where so many people shared some similarities when it came to these identities. And it just felt really welcoming and warm, and I felt like my work really spoke to them. Coming out for me was a very difficult experience. I think in large part because it almost happened by accident, where my mom overheard a conversation that I was having with a boy that I was interested in. Um, and it really wasn't the way that I would have wanted to tell my parents about myself. I think I would have waited for a longer time, even though I knew at that time already who I was in terms of my sexual orientation. But I didn't really have the right language for all of it, and I wasn't ready to have such an intense conversation. It's different for everybody. I think coming out is such a deeply personal thing, and it's very vulnerable, and you should only do it when you feel secure in yourself and comfortable with having the conversation and feeling like you can be in control of the situation as much as you can. But for me, yeah, it was just incredibly stressful and I'd say traumatic even, because my parents' reaction to it was terrible. And for many years, they were kind of in denial about it as well. They didn't really want to bring it up. They felt like it was something they were embarrassed about, and they didn't want to tell anyone else about it. So there was a lot of shame around my sexual orientation for many years. And I would say it wasn't until I graduated college and I started graduate school and I was living in my own place that my parents started to come around and see that, well, he's an adult now, he can make his own decisions, choose his own path. Not that sexuality is something that is chosen. I don't think that's the case at all. It's just so difficult for many of us. But I think they started to see that I was my own person. Because I think growing up, they sort of saw me as an extension of themselves and a reflection of who they were. And all they had been taught and all they really knew, because they didn't have all the information, was that gay people are wrong and are sick and need help and need to be fixed. All these really homophobic attitudes, and it took them a long time to learn about better information, and also I think to see me as still their son essentially, but there was just this piece that they didn't really understand for a long time. Writing my poetry has definitely been really useful and important for my coming out process. I'd already spent many years coming out to friends and family and peers, so I'd become used to being out. But my writing still made me feel a lot bolder and braver because I was writing into not only the coming out experience in an everyday sense, but really thinking about these issues that LGBTQ people face in a more complicated and nuanced way. One of the things that frustrated me over time was seeing how in television shows and movies, the moment where a character comes out of the closet is usually very brief, and it only happens one time. And that's really not my experience, and I don't think it's the experience of many LGBTQ people. There's a constant coming out, a continual process, and you might go back and forth or use different terms or discover that, you want to identify in this other way that feels more accurate to who you really are. And so you refine your language, your vocabulary around expressing who you are. And so that's a big topic that I've been exploring in my writing. There's a lot of things I would say to young poets in the Asian American community who are just starting out. I think, first of all, you have to be persistent and you have to believe in yourself as much as you can. I think there are a lot of hurdles. I think many of us come from families who might not completely understand what it is we're trying to do or want to do. But I think in a lot of cases, those families, our parents, are still really caring and loving, but they just worry about our future. And so, I would try to have a conversation with those family members about why you want to pursue the arts, why you want to pursue poetry or writing in general. And you maybe give them some examples. You might give them work by other Asian American writers to read, to show them that, others have taken on this path before and have been very successful in it. So someone like Marilyn Chin or Liang Li, these really incredible established poets who have found great success in their writing, and show them that this is possible. So that's the main thing that I would think about, but also just for yourself to remember why it is that you love poetry, why it is you love writing, what does it do for you? Does it enable you to explore your emotions in a deeper way? Does it allow you to play and experiment with language? It could be any number of reasons, but I think it's really important to know for yourself because it can be a tough career path. There are lots of ups and downs, and it's really unpredictable. So I think it's really important for you to know within yourself the reason or the reasons for pursuing this.